Hi, and welcome to a reading for our annual Indie Lit Fest this afternoon. Now we're with our David Fulcher, who will be giving us this reading. So I'll just turn it over to him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for listening and attending virtually. Hopefully you have a coffee or tea or your beverage of choice for the reading today. As a way of introduction, my name is, again, R. David Fulcher, and I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction. I also dabble in poetry, and I also publish with my wife, Lisa, Samsara magazine, and there's information about that through both the Frostburg Creative Writing Center site as well as samsaramagazine.net. So it's a little bit about me, and there's some other resources you can go to find out more about my work. And without further ado, I will jump into some readings for you. And again, thank you for listening. My first reading is going to be a poem. It's from my first chapbook ever called Lessons of October. This was published way back in 1993. And a lot of the reading today is going to be tailored towards things dark and wonderful because it is the Halloween season. And so this poem is aptly called Ode to the Night. To the night, the dark delight. The children sleep soundly in gentle white, breathing in time with the raven's flight. To the night, the waxen moon, audience of one to the witch's croon, driving the tides for the sailor's doom. To the night, its starlit fires, which guide the ghost from funeral pyres, which soften the harpy to play the lyre. And that's Ode to the Night, my first chapbook. And I should mention there'll be questions at the end, or I don't know, Jennifer, if you want questions during the readings, but let me continue with another one. Again, I'm going to stay on my dark theme. This poem will actually lead off my new horror collection, A Dark Harvest, to be published by Gravelight Press in October 2021. And this is called Eulogy to Edgar Allen Poe. Man of dark musings and opiate visions, mind of pits and rats, black cats, and ancestral corpses. How is it that love sparkled within those dark recesses, like diamonds within a bedrock of obsidian, that first sprang from that ebony hand, as vibrant and unlikely as lilacs from snow? Tales of cities under the sea, of waves weeping softly, Annabel Lee. Did the bells foretell of your demise? Or was it born on raven's wing, thus falling from the sky? Could it be that your last vision was your brightest? O soul of all that is night, inspire my pen to wail and to write. That's Ode to E.A. Poe. Changing gears a little bit, my first novella-length work was historical fiction set in World War II, and particularly dealt with the Holocaust. So I have an excerpt from that book about the description of the concentration camp and what it must have been like for somebody to endure that. And this chapter from the book Trains to Nowhere is called Senbrook. The Senbrook concentration camp never sleeps. There are always trains coming and going, always the motion and sounds of loading and unloading, always guards passing, always spotlights sweeping, always dogs barking, always the smoke of human fat frying in eternal ovens. In rare quiet times, one can hear the wind wash through the barbed wire fences like a slow moan. Inside the barracks, there is always kneading, hunger, spit and blood and aching bones. The corrugated tin roofs shed no starlight, but if one is a dreamer, one can still see them shine in the night sky. Occasionally, there's the distant rumble of bombers in the distance. But even if one is a dreamer, a bomb is too much to wish for. Across the camp, young lovers embrace. There is no time here for ceremony, no time for religion. God is outside of the camp or dead. There's only time for a rushed embrace, hastened words, and the almost painful promise. When this is all over, we shall marry and buy a home. We shall have many children and worship in God's temple. Outside, dawn is approaching. The guards change shifts and the spotlights dim their fevered glances. It is tomorrow at Senbrook, but it is also today and the yesterday before. It is last night. Again, that's from my book, Trains to Nowhere, historical fiction. And the longest piece I plan to read today, and we're doing okay on time, right, is from Halloween Party 2019. Get into the spirit. And I will read the story Pumpkin Seed Spit, which also is in my upcoming collection of Dark Harvest by Gravelight Press. So here's Pumpkin Seed Spit. That's a good trick-or-treating story to get us all in the mood. And yeah, Jennifer, break out the candy. So Brian and Rhea waited near the stop sign at the intersection of Wooford Lane and Marlborough Way. Brian wore black and white face paint and a skeleton shirt. Rhea wore a pointy witch hat and a cape. The pillowcases in their hands for collecting candy were empty. "Where is he?" Brian asked impatiently. "He'll be out soon. Chill out. You know how mean his father is," Rhea replied. A door slammed and Matt ran out of the house. Sniffling, he wiped tears from his eyes. Matt wore green sweats and green dishwashing gloves. He carried an alien mask in his hands. "Are you okay, Matt?" Rhea asked. Matt put on a good face. "Yeah, just another fight between my parents," he said stoically, taking Rhea's hand when she offered it to him. She always made him feel better. "All right then," said Brian, the unspoken leader of the group. "Let's get this show on the road." "Sorry for the delay, guys," Matt said apologetically. "I bet the good candy's already gone." Brian slapped him on the shoulder. "Well, you're in luck, buddy. This year it's not about candy. This year, we have a shot at eating lunch with the 8th graders. "What are you talking about?" Matt asked. Rhea interjected. "The 8th graders made some stupid dare with Brian to see the pumpkin tree, and if we see it, they will let us eat lunch at their table." "You guys can't be serious. That thing is a myth. I say we go trick-or-treating like every year." Rhea squeezed Matt's hands and smiled at him in agreement. "Nope, this time they'll be forced to take us seriously," Brian asserted. "You two can act like grade schoolers if you want. I'm going for the pumpkin tree." Brian took off down Marlborough Way. Rhea shrugged before she and Matt followed their friend down the street. The trio received odd looks as they marched determinedly past parents and the other trick-or-treaters, never once stopping at any of the houses to amass confections. Brian's pace was brisk and the others struggled to keep up with him. "Slow down, Brian." "Yeah, what's the rush?" Matt asked. Brian turned and glared at them. "You guys actually want to walk through the woods in the dark?" "Not me. We probably have a half an hour of daylight left." "How would we even prove we found the pumpkin tree?" asked Rhea. Without answering, Brian held up his cell phone, pointed at it for emphasis, and marched on. They walked and walked. Matt and Rhea looked longingly at the yards and porches, decorated with garish orange lights, plastic tombstones, and inflatable ghouls. It was unusually warm for October, and they were all sweating as Marlborough Way became an uphill climb. Finally, they reached the dead end of the road and began following a small dirt trail into the woods. Soon the narrow path widened to a gravel road where a great clearing stretched out in both directions. Every several hundred yards, metal support structures held up power lines, like ancient gods pleading to the heavens. After the clearing, the small dirt path resumed. Eventually, the three friends emerged from the woods and reached the parking lot of the high school. "Let's rest here," Brian said. They all sat down on the curb, shared a package of M&Ms that they had brought from home. For several moments, the gang was content to rest and munch. Matt finally spoke. "Brian, what if this is all a joke? What if the 8th graders are playing us? Not only will we be harassed all year, but we'll totally miss out on Halloween." "Don't you think I've thought about that?" Brian fired back. "Man, you guys must think I'm an idiot. I'm hoping it is a joke. I plan to go in there, take a photo of some creepy tree, and tell them we found the pumpkin tree. The joke will be on them when they try to go find it." "I don't know, Brian," Rhea said. "I think they're smarter than that." "Remember, I'm a year older and wiser than both of you," Brian countered. "That's only because you were held back a grade," Matt replied. Brian raised a fist as if to punch Matt. The younger boy shrunk back against the curb. "All right, let's get moving. The woods get really thick beyond the sewer pipe." The sewer pipe?" Rhea gulped. "Yes, the sewer pipe," Brian replied. "It's tall enough that we won't even have to hunch down to walk through. Relax, I've gone through it 100 times. Brian hurried across the parking lot. Rat and Mia reluctantly followed. Soon they entered the woods on the opposite side of the lot. It was getting later and darker. There was no path. The branches and brambles snatched and stung them. Matt looked back at Rhea and shook his head as they continued on. The sewer pipe was nearly 6 feet in circumference. Brian activated the flashlight on his iPhone, though it did little to cut through the enveloping darkness. They tried to straddle the concrete pipe as much as possible to avoid the murky water, but inevitably ended up with soaked shoes and socks. Finally, they reached the other side and were relieved. Although the daylight was dying and only provided meager light in the deep woods, Brian scrambled up one of the muddy banks of the stream that was fed by the pipe and squinted into the darkness ahead. "I think I see something," Brian exclaimed. "Ha ha," Rhea replied. She felt dirty and exhausted as they climbed up a slippery bank. "Good one, Brian," echoed Matt. "You really got us that time." "No, I'm serious. Come here," he ordered. They joined him on the bank and followed his outstretched hand. At first, the light was so subtle as to be insignificant, but after staring at it for several moments, none could deny the orange flickering glow in the distance. "Okay," said Rhea. "I've seen enough horror movies to know that a campfire in the middle of the woods on Halloween night is never a good thing. We should get out of here now," she urged. "You two can sissy out if you want," Brian said. "I didn't walk all this way for nothing." He stormed ahead, oblivious to the noise he made while crashing through the undergrowth. "He's like a bull in a china closet," Matt exclaimed. "So much for the element of surprise." Rhea gripped Matt's hand again. "Come on, let's go see this tree." "Guys, come on, you won't believe this," they heard Brian say in the distance. Fumbling through the last thicket of branches, they joined Brian in a small clearing. An ancient, colossal tree stood before them, limbs stretching out in every direction. Dozens of jack-o'-lanterns lit by candles that flickered in the breeze hung from countless branches. For several moments, they stood in silent awe before the pumpkin tree. "Who did this?" Matt asked in belief. "The 8th graders," whispered Rhea. "No, I don't give them that much credit," said Brian. "Probably some local college kids set this up." "I don't know. It seems like an awful lot of work," Matt replied. Suddenly, the tree limbs creaked, and the tree twisted and bent over them. The jack-o'-lanterns rocked violently from side to side. Matt, Rhea, and Brian stood frozen with fear. "Silence!" a guttural voice cried from a jagged opening in the tree's trunk. "I am not some parlor trick here to frighten school children. I am the pumpkin tree. I have been here for countless generations. I will be here long after your children's children have turned to dust." They instinctively stepped back from the tree, but were met by a network of branches that felt strong as steel cables against their backs. "There is no escaping me," the tree answered. The voice made their skin crawl, and its breath reeked of decay and death. What do you want?" Brian asked. "I ask that you simply return to your night's activities, passing out my seeds as you go. Open your pillowcases and approach me," the tree demanded. The branches against their back pushed the kids forward right in front of the awful maw of the tree. Brian and Matt held open their pillowcases. Rhea stood in a daze. "Rhea," Matt insisted. "Rhea, we have to do this." Finally, Rhea held out her bag, but she turned her face away from the pumpkin tree as she did so. The pumpkin tree inhaled with such force that Rhea had to grab her pointed hat to avoid it from being sucked in the gaping hole of the mouth. An awful exhalation followed as the tree rapidly spat several dozen seeds into each bag. Despite the bags being largely empty, they soon became so weighty, the friends had to hold onto their pillowcases with white knuckles to avoid dropping their heavy loads. The tree breathed over them with a sickly, intoxicating breath that smelled of gourds and the earth. "Go," it demanded, loosening the network of branches that held them prisoner. Brian, Rhea, and Matt quickly retraced their steps as they made their long journey home, remembering little of the details. The sewer pipe, the power lines, the path in the woods. It all seemed effortless as the moon watched their trek from high above. It was well past 7 o'clock, and they were in full darkness. But even that seemed more of a comfort than a hindrance. When they reached the first house near the dead end, they knocked and said in unison, "Trick or treat." As Henry Armitage opened the door, Brian opened his bag. The middle-aged man frowned at them before starting to mutter something about the lateness of the hour. Armitage gazed into Brian's bag of seeds and was immediately mesmerized. An orange energy tendril spiraled upward, carrying a single seed into Armitage's mouth. Brian, Matt, and Rhea wanted to scream, but found it impossible. While their souls were wrenched into knots by the horror they witnessed, outwardly they were emotionless, even tranquil, as layers of skin and flesh melted away, and all that remained of Henry was a living skeleton. When the transformation was complete, they went to the next house. Rhea shared her seeds with Ansith Waite, a young mother of two, was hideously transformed into a witch with boils and green teeth. One pause here. Thank you. Matt received his chance as well and didn't hesitate to share 3 seeds with a couple and their young baby, leaving behind a family of giant pale, eyeless larvae that oozed and squiggled out of their clothes. The kids continued in this manner into the night, all the way down Marlborough Way, up Woodford Lane, and across the great loop of Limestone Place. They then visit the homes on Metzerat Road that stretched almost to the interstate. They continued on till they were left with only 3 empty pillowcases. Just before midnight, they were dragged spellbound back through the woods and the creek to the pumpkin tree. As before, the tree greeted them with its awful thorny embrace. "Excellent, children, excellent," the tree croaked, clasping 2 short branches together like hands. "Tonight, we have ushered in a new age of monsters, the likes of which the world has not seen since the last time I was visited, centuries ago. You think your bags are empty, but I am not such an unkind fellow as that. Please open your sacks and see," the tree urged them. Still entranced, they each looked inside their bags. Orange tendrils of light like vines reached up and forced open their throats, bringing with the light a single seed for each of them. The pumpkin tree shook and laughed deeply as the children changed. Its limbs clicked together like the crackling of teeth in delight. Moments later, the tree bent over a skeleton, witch, and swamp creature approvingly. "Fly from this place, you have a head start, but I fear your friends and neighbors are doomed. You have become monsters in the purest sense. As such, you must exist on the edge of shadow and darkness. Never forget that you are and forever shall be in my debt. Never forget me, especially on All Hallows Eve." The creatures that had been Matt, Rhea, and Brian nodded, understanding and embracing their fate. "Flee," the tree roared, and 3 new monsters escaped into the darkness. Yeah. Thank you. Again, that's from Halloween Party 2019, and that was Pumpkin Seed Spit. I actually have completed my list, but I have other things. Should I continue? Okay, I'll switch back to some poetry. And hopefully everybody's still awake out there. So this is from my more recent chapbook of poetry. This is called Angels in the Barrier, and this was from 2019. And I will start here with a poem named Perception. You who do not believe that angels dance on pinheads, tell me that rainbows are not contained in prisms, that love does not lie in the shadows of photographs, that you do not lie. Nothing exists in a single state. I am not contained by these walls. I can shrink and reside in the dirty hovel of a bottle. I can expand and reside in the mansion of verse. That was Perception. I'll continue here. This is a love song to a guitar, and I do have a beautiful wooden guitar acoustic, so musicians out there, hopefully they can relate. This is Confessions of a Wood Guitar. Men have loved me since I was a crude, one-stringed thing. For it is to me they come in the dead of night when their souls are like vases without flowers. I alone wait their caresses, their gentle rhythms which drive me to music. Some arouse my passions to great themes and movements. Others use me basely, choking my wooden neck while I shriek and wail. The quiet ones are content to hold my frame against their own. I, none other, console the truly lonely heart, and for this I am locked away in a dusty black coffin, exhumed for the pleasure of men and buried again. That's Confessions of a Wood Guitar. Let's see what else. I'm going to do a poem that I wrote after a visit to New Mexico, where we visited the Zuni Pueblo of Acoma, and it's up on a plateau, so you have to do quite a climb to get up there. So really impressive place if you get out there. So this is called Sky City, based on the history of the Zuni Indian Pueblo of Acoma in New Mexico. Acoma, the Zuni Masada, defiantly cuts and opens the sky, revealing dark blue innards. Coronado came, young men fed the thirsty mesa, with heavy blood which held the dust. Coronado conquered. Odious timbers were dragged to the mesa top, dragged and erected as a shrine to Catholicism. a shrine for the holy and the devilish as well. Proud Coronado, you came and you conquered. But did your soul ever yearn to ascend the ladders to the great dark blue heavens, that great blue sheet which covered and smothered you? Of the Sky City. This is a song about Alzheimer's called Afternoon Walker. Your hands are brittle like ice mittens, your steps cautious as if you stood on the lip of the world, swaying kite-like over the bright abyss of youth, willing yet not willing to fall and forget those summit visions of dance and love, that bitter salt hatred, that gnarled tyrant age. Is that what guides you through this maze of Chevys, Fords, and Volvos, day after day? Another machine who has forgotten its instructions, but runs on until the motor stops? That's Afternoon Walker. Trying to get to some of my favorites. Okay on time? Well, I guess for October, I have to read The Bat. So this is called The Bat. And again, this is all from Angels in the Barrier, my more recent chapbook. This was also written in New Mexico, so it had a big impact on my poetry, at least. Taking inverted Sabbath in the caverns of Carlsbad, I measure time in locust breath and calcite drip. My bird chest rising and falling with the gentle tides of this black carpet of brotherhood. Footsteps fill my dreams, sun-bleached tourists groping into the cavern's belly to enter the sublime. Their voices like a million valves releasing pressure. For an instant, they will recognize the face of God in this hard darkness. The stalactite points of his beard, the cascading formations of his brow. And that fraction of animal intellect will rush forth, freed from concept and equation, to join our ranks as we veer through this Jerusalem darkness, towards dust and sustenance, towards the amphitheater where they wait for their own departure. And that's The Bat. Let's see, I have enough time for a shorter story. This is the story's called The Fairy Lights, and I like it because I experiment sometimes with putting verse inside of prose. So this is in my book, The Lighthouse at Montauk Point. And here's the fairy lights. Rest a while, friend, for it is clear that you have walked far over hill and valley and penetrated the wild and strange woods to have happened upon this long preserved manuscript between the moss-covered rocks. I came upon this very spot perhaps many years ago now as just a lad. Here I took my respite, beckoned by a fair breeze sweeping over the verdant fields and a song sung in dulcet tones far sweeter than any produced by mortal throats. I was weary from hiking many miles, and my body eagerly fell into a deep sleep. A song floated over my consciousness, sung by 1,000 childlike voices. Weary traveler, rest your head and sleep a while where the fairies tread. Weary traveler, laugh in kind and take deep draughts of fairy wine. Weary traveler, spend the night, follow the trail of the fairy lights. Something awoke me with a start, and I was astonished to find myself surrounded by scores of tiny ethereal beings with elven features, swaying joyfully through the air on gossamer wings as they laughed and sang. They brought the tiniest goblets to my parched lips, and from the cups flowed the most intoxicating wine made of clove and dandelion. I noticed then that the sun was falling, and they tugged me to my feet with dozens of tiny hands. They beckoned for me to follow. My journey was dreamlike, as I was under the spell of their golden drink, and they began to glow like will-o-wisps as darkness descended over the landscape. Finally, the small shapes converged in a dark eldritch wood full of black, stunted, and gnarled trees. I felt compelled to follow, and though I was scratched and my garments ripped by errant branches, the magical wine had made me numb to all pain. Finally, I followed them into an entrance carved into a hillside. Tripping over a root, I tumbled into darkness, and knocking my head, temporarily lost consciousness. I awoke suddenly to a jovial ruckus, or so I thought. The same beings alighted around my head, and upon seeing me awaken, rushed forward with hollow acorn husks, brimming with fluid. In the near darkness, I assumed that it was more flower wine, but the drink was thick with a bitter, coppery taste. As I turned to spit out the foul fluid, I found myself restrained by hundreds of silk-like threads. It was then that a wind swept into the wretched hollow, stirring the embers of a fire in the center of the room. In that brief moment, I saw that the features of the fairies had changed. What once had been light and airy in their aspect was now dark and sadistic. They wore coats of dark mail, and their eyes, once innocent and wondrous, had hateful yellow slits. They waved wicked curved blades like those wielded by the Turks. But the second accursed wind brought darker tidings and visions than the first. For when it swept through the chamber and sparked the fire, I noticed the purpose of this dark gathering. Tiny incisions had been made across my ribs, and many a fairy dined on bloody strips of pink meat, skewered on the ends of their evil blades. I know not what strength of God allowed me to break free from my bonds, swat and smash away those little demons, and haul myself out of that pit-like burrow into the cool night air. But I did not rest in my flight until reaching this very spot, and I recovered my wits and breath on these very rocks. So, weary traveler, do not tarry long in these unhallowed woods, and leave before the night, lest you too fall victim to the fairy lights. The end. So, it's the fairy lights. We doing okay? We want to break at what, 12:35 or so? Okay. We'll go to some more poetry. This is called Green Pastures. I'm not fool enough to believe that there never comes a time when one must leave the green pastures and the music behind to fight for their beliefs in a man-made hell. It's just that I rebel against it, that's all. I worry about those who go in with fanatical eagerness, with the "I'm going to kill me a commie" look on their faces. They've never seen what I've seen, or at least it didn't mean the same thing to them. I would like nothing more than to leave the green pastures, just leave my soul up there in the cirrus and think of nothing but feel everything. The battles I would contemplate would be no bigger than Thoreau's ants. At least it would be a natural conflict, devoid of the insanity of man. Sometimes I feel like a scarlet crab hanging onto the rocks beside the sea, which threatens to sweep me away. Sometimes I yearn to drown in those waves and know of the peace beyond the green pastures. I believe I have another, it's my other book, chaplet here, let's see. So again, the spirit of October, I was experimenting with the sestina form of poetry. So this is called October Sestina, and you'll see a lot of repetition in the images and the words as is part of the form. So October Sestina. Colors crunched, autumn hues on painted leaves. I shifted to take you in under the late sunlight. Clouds of breath sailed away, their warmth berating the air. The lake was a mirror, recognizing dusk in its stillness. Our pile of oranges and yellows was recently scattered by children, the same children who play at every leaf pile in our minds as ghosts. The darkness came gradually, building hauntings for ghosts who lived on the fringes of darkness, fearful of the fingers of sunlight. A nocturnal breeze came out of hiding to disturb the stillness and to wrestle with the branches, to forfeit their leaves. The leaves matted our hair, and we laughed like children, not sensing our vulnerability to the cutting air. I can smell those woods in the air, and I can see it in the way the leaves spiral down, down, down through the late sunlight, like stones onto the mirror lake, shattering its stillness. I can see the fragments spinning crazily upwards towards the children, and their screams echoing through the woods and disappearing like ghosts. The wind through the trees like stirring ghosts, or perhaps more like the hushed screams of captured sunlight. And when I walk through the woods at night, I step on the leaves cautiously, careful not to break the lake's children, with 1,000 spinning fragments of stillness, which cut invisibly like ghosts through the air. All Hallows Eve, and the mystery is in the air, comes with the images of goblins, witches, and ghosts. This holiday has never been one for sunlight, and it's easy to forget that the pirates and demons are mere children. Carrying their orange and yellow bags like so many leaves, I've never seen that night achieve its desired stillness. Before dawn raises her pink, flushed face, displacing the stillness, with the extension of long, slender fingers of sunlight, turning the vampires into dust and dispelling the ghosts, into dirty sheets and sleepy-eyed children. Just like last year and the year before, the leaves spiral down, down, down through the air. It's my October Sistine, so ode to the month. So probably a good spot to end on. I've got a fair amount of October content for you, hopefully. So get you in the spirit of pumpkin spice lattes and donuts and what have you. So.
Well, I so admire anyone who can write a Sistina, David. That was spectacular.
Well, thank you very much.
And
it's a tough form, I wonder if the repetition sometimes is too repetitive. So, to get a different take on the words that you use again and again is I found it a very difficult form. So it did not come easy, and it took me a long time. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. So.
So while we have this little pause, there are two remarks, but not a question. Okay. So John Burroughs gives you applause, as does Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Speaking of John Burroughs, who has been always a great friend to the Center and the Indie Lit Festival, he's actually going to be reading tomorrow in a Zoom reading that is... let's see, The Beat Goes On, Beat Poet Laureates, and it appears that it's being sponsored by the Bronx Book Fair. So just while I'm seeing him, I want to make sure that we, recognize that. And also your new collection that's coming out is in Gravelight, is that right?
Yeah, so it's Gravelight Press, which is an offshoot of horror fiction from Devil's Party Press. So they made a horror-only line that's brand new this year. And next October is when that will be published.
And hopefully we'll all be able to be together when, for next
year.
week.
Hopefully I can give you a live copy, not a PDF or something like that. So
that's great.
But
they're readers of Exhumed, which is a Gravelight Press release, who will be with us reading later this afternoon. So we have other events lined up for the rest of the afternoon. Yes,
I believe David and Diane will be participating in some activities and readings. So great folks from Devil's Party Press and Gravelight Press. So. And thank you, John and Jordan, for the comments. It's always meaningful to me that I strike a note with somebody through my words. So that's what it's all about. So I really appreciate it. And I hope to check out the beat poetry, something I am terrible at, but I really dig the people that can do that well. So again, something to tune in on for sure tomorrow. So
David, thank you so much. And we appreciate the generosity of your doing a reading with us.
Oh, absolutely. And I hope to see everybody in person next year at a reading or at the festival table or whatever we have with Samsara next year. And thank you, Jordan and Jennifer, for all you do every year, but especially to put together this virtual conference. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.